Everyone, thanks for joining us for today's market briefing on the Taiwan market and the cultural awareness training. It's good to see a lot of you on the call today. We're going to be doing a deep dive into the wine market in Taiwan, as well as having a closer look at the cultural aspects of doing business there. But before we do, let's acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land.
We acknowledge the lands of the traditional custodians across Australia. We recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples' continuing connection to land, water and sky country. We acknowledge the wine regions and hundreds of different nations around this continent, and the ancient soils on which we stand and grow. From the Wadani saltwater peoples of the Margaret River in our west, to the East Coast Sunrise people of the Yuin Nation, and the Southern Island and Saltbush peoples of the Nione peoples of Tasmania. Today and always, we pay our deep respects to the custodians, those who went before and those who will follow, as the knowledge holders of tomorrow. This is Australia.
I would also like to acknowledge that, we're coming from around the globe today, but I'm coming from the traditional country of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and pay respect to the elders past and present. We also extend that respect to other Aboriginal language groups and other First Nations. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sarah Roberts. I'm the Senior Project Marketing Manager with Asia Pacific at Wine Australia. Before we get into the content for today, I'll just take you through a little bit of housekeeping. So to the right of your screen, you'll find a chat and a Q&A function. So to join the conversation, you can just post directly into that chat. Or to ask a question, just click on the Add to Q&A button. We've got experts from Austrade and from Value Learning who'll be able to answer as many questions as they can, time permitting today, but anything we can't be answered or can't get to, we'll follow up with you after the session. A recording of today's webinar will also be emailed to all attendees tomorrow, so if there's anything you want to catch up on, you'll be able to do that. Lastly, if you're having any technical issues, we recommend that you just refresh your browser or pop a question into the chat and we'll see what we can do to help you. So let's begin. I'd like to introduce you first to Brent Moore, the Deputy Representative and Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner for Austrade Taiwan, who will give a market overview. He will also be joined later by Danny Ho, the General Manager of Seven Pyramid in Taiwan, which is an importer of wines from Australia, as well as wines from a number of other countries. So Brent, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Pleasure to be joining you, everybody in Australia, this good afternoon. It's currently 10 o'clock in Taipei, and very happy to be speaking about one of my favourite subjects, which is, of course, drinking wine here in Taipei, which is something I've made it a personal mission of mine to become very accomplished at. So I hope over the next 15 minutes, what I have to share about you to give a general flavour of the market will be of interest to you, and I hope it will complement the excellent cultural awareness training that Wine Australia has prepared for everybody here. So thank you very much for your attention. I'll be speaking for about 15 minutes, and as Sarah mentioned, we have a very special cameo coming in for this session. We're joined by Danny Ho, who will be answering a couple of importer-specific questions, and we'll also make time to have some Q&A from the winemakers on this call. I can see at the last check here we have about 14. Very pleased to hear about your interest in the Taiwan market. So just to give a little bit of scene setting, I know COVID has been with us now for about a year and a half, and hasn't been much of an opportunity to travel to meet with customers. So for those who haven't had the chance to come into Taiwan, we're the small little island there in the South China Sea. There's around the same population as Australia on the island of Taiwan, with an economy of about 1/3 the size of Australia. and a land mass that is about half the size of Tasmania, or about 1/50th of the size of Australia. So very, very dense. That means it's a fairly easy market to serve. You don't have the same challenges you find, say, in the United States, where you have to work with multiple different partners in each individual state, or you're dealing with different jurisdictions, such as in Europe. It's very condensed, and you'll find it's a market that's fairly straightforward and fairly well versed in international business norms. Only a short flight away. There's flights from Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane direct into Taipei, and they run at about 9 or 10 hours. So very much would encourage anyone on the call who is looking at visiting our region to consider making a call in on Taipei to take forward your business development plans. Why would you consider the Taiwan wine market? I thought maybe just to kick off, we'll go through some of the headline numbers relevant to the wine market over here. So going off the 2021 wine data that we pulled out from Australian official statistics, Taiwan currently stands as Australia's 13th largest wine export market. It's been growing very strongly and actually overtook mainland China in 2021 for reasons that will be very well known to all of you. The overall growth is, to be fair, it's modest. So with some increase in sales of Australian wine, that's come at the expense of some other wine varieties. We're unashamedly proud of how that's happened over the last 12 to 24 months. But the entire market is growing overall at about 2.5%, which is similar to what you might find in other mature and developed markets. What we do find is a strong preference towards old world wines, and particularly French wines. French wines definitely do dominate menus over here and overall import volumes. And about 53% of the wine sold here in Taiwan is French, rounding out with Italy and Spain and a few other old world varieties brings the total to around 80%. So it is still dominated by the traditional players. Overall, we did see a bit of a bumper year in 2021 through COVID, and total wine volume increased by around 18%, and 70% of the wine that was sold through retail channels was priced at above $30. So it's by no means a cheap and cheerful market. It is a market that is prepared to pay a premium for high quality wines, which gives a indication of the level of sophistication of your channel partners here and of the consumers in general. And I'll come to the consumer profile in just a moment. Probably not a lot of surprise here to know that 85% of wine sold over here are red varieties. That's pretty much what you'd find in similar North Asian markets. In terms of where it's consumed, there's a fairly strong food and wine culture here, particularly in Taipei, but increasingly so in places like Hsinchu and Taichung, which is where we see a lot of the semiconductors and some of the more faster growing parts of Taiwan. A lot of Michelin star restaurants there. So you'll find many interesting opportunities to partner with the likes of those. And lastly, I can't see that last point, so it just hasn't popped up on my screen properly, so I'm just going to skip over that one. So how is wine being consumed in this market? So we worked with Euromonitor about 18 months ago to compile a bit of a profile of wine consumption and what the situation is over here. This shows, in terms of where the actual transaction took place, around 1/3 of wine transactions take place through food service channels, with the remaining 2/3 through retail. This is a little bit of a misnomer, just because there's such a strong BYO culture in Taiwan. So I'd say the actual place of consumption would probably flip this data around, and you find a situation where probably 2/3 of all wine that is purchased in Taiwan ultimately is consumed in a restaurant setting, and a third or less would be in home consumption, which isn't as strong as, of course, what the restaurant market is. And one of the drivers around that is really the profile of the consumer over here. If we drill into the demographics a little bit, clearly what you can see here is a very different demographic profile from Australia. We do have a much older demographic here in Taiwan, and just by virtue of the maths here, the largest consumer segment that you'll be selling to is people that are over 35 and up to about 65. That's for a couple of reasons. That is, the generation that really transformed Taiwan's economy going back into the 80s and have done very well and been very successful out of that, and as a result have embraced wine drinking culture. But also it's that demographic that tends to be business executives and business owners who are out entertaining clients and dining or hosting banquets for employees and family members and the like. So the reality, I think, for the Taiwan market is, for as much as we are seeing really positive signs of sort of young consumers really embracing wine, the real backbone of the wine market is that older consumer. Hence, you can see the emphasis there on a higher price point of wine and some of the really premium old world wines. How is that translating into the types of wine that is coming in? So a couple of trends you can see here. As I mentioned, overall, we've seen some pretty good growth over 2021, around 18% increases there, certainly according to the trade data. French wines indicated on the right there really do dominate. 53% comes from France. The French wine will outsell Australian wine in about 6-1, which is something that Australian winemakers need to take into consideration. But probably more importantly, in terms of Taiwan's attractiveness as a wine market, the overall price points that are being paid are increasing. So if we take Australia, for example, if you go back to 2015, the average price per litre for Australian wine being imported was around $5.35 US. That now has grown up to about $8 US per litre, which has grown, even though it's sort of waxed and wanes a little bit as there's been some fluctuations in the exchange rate. We do see that there is a preparedness to pay a premium for the Australian brand of wine, which I think is a very healthy sign for wine brands that are looking to move beyond the more of your cheap and cheerful type of positioning. And we see a little bit there that France and the United States have come off a touch in the last year, but one of the really high performers has been New Zealand. There's certainly a very, very strong brand positioning there for New Zealand wines. They're attracting higher prices than what Australia is able to get into the market. This is despite New Zealand being the only economy there that has a free trade agreement with Taiwan. So really it is quality over price. It's fair to say for this market. Looking at how COVID has impacted wine imports, I'd be really happy to hear from Danny and get his take on this. We did see a bit of a rebound in the from a contraction really from June until November of 2020, as people started, the hotels and restaurants started to reopen again. And people choosing to dine at home a little bit more than they were in the past. So Australia has benefited from some shifting trends towards wine. We see, and I'll come to this later on, there's been a recognition amongst wine consumers that Australian winemakers, amongst other producers, have suffered from the trade disputes on the other side of the Taiwan Strait, and there has been a bit of an embracing of Australian wine as a result, and we've enjoyed a bit of a renaissance because of that. So we've seen in a couple of the monthly trade figures that Australian wine is actually number 2 position behind France, which is very encouraging. What prices are consumers paying? So we can happy to hand over a copy of these slides later on for anybody who needs them, just in terms of trying to get your wine mix right for this market. We see here if we include premium, ultra premium, and luxury, we're really talking about probably 3/5 of the price points are above $30. So not a volume market, really is a lower volume but higher price, and the sweet spot seems to be in that price point where wine is sold for between $30 and $75. Now, markups, of course, will be different just depending on the arrangement that you have with your distributor there and how much you want to spend on marketing. But that gives you a bit of an indication of what to expect from the market. How's that translated for Australian wine? If we look on the right-hand side here, encouragingly, the overall price segment that has enjoyed the most amount of growth from out of Australia in the last 12 months has been the CIF price point that comes in at about $10 and over. So hopefully, while it won't clear out a lot of the excess volume as a market, you should find it for the volumes that you are selling in here. It should be a reasonably profitable market for you. What kind of varieties are being exported to Taiwan? We can take a little bit of a look here, comparing the last couple of years. So carbonated and sparkling wine has grown very, very strongly, but overall it is a fair way down the list of the top varieties that are being sold. So looking on the right here, we see Shiraz dominates, grown quite strongly over the last year, and it's fair to say Shiraz is sort of the halo variety into Taiwan. Reasonably good recognition of regions such as the Barossa being known for producing fairly outstanding Shiraz, and then other varieties coming in there. And a lot of these figures will be swayed fairly significantly by the types of blends that Treasury is putting out. It won't be shown here in these figures, but Treasury does appear to probably have around 30 to 40% of Australian wine sales into this market. And if we go to the next one here, so how does Australian wine figure in the minds of Taiwanese consumers? So it's fair to say we do fairly well in off-premise, particularly in hypermarkets and also in other more everyday type retail. And if you were to ask a layperson that is not a wine connoisseur, could you name an international wine brand? Chances are they probably would name an Australian one, just by virtue of just how popular and how omnipresent Australian wines tend to be. So Yellowtail, Penfolds, Lindemans, for example, Jacobs Creek, they can be pretty much seen everywhere. So there's some fairly good mental real estate out there for Australian wine, I would say, amongst the general population. But when it comes into the more connoisseur market, we do see that that bias or that preference for old world wines tend to play through. Australian wines will appear on more of the entry level price points on some of the wine lists, but we fortunately are seeing some good growth at the elite level as well. And Australian wines are also quite popular for banqueting, for weddings and other forms of celebrations. And when we did the work with Euromonitor, one of the questions that the research put out there was to inquire with some wine importers and distributors how they see the market. And I'll be really keen to hear from Danny in a moment. But the findings we found was things like in Taiwan, the impression of Australian wine is still entry level, and it sort of in some ways suffers from being in the wrong price category, I'd say. but on the plus side, Australian wines are friendly and acceptable to the general public as a gateway. And also Australia is sort of seen in some ways in the same sort of frame as Chile and Argentinian wine, as they usually at the same price point and have a similar taste profile. This one here just gives a bit of a indication in the breakdown on how the routes to market. This is from a guidebook called Deborah Mayberg's Guide to the Taiwan Wine Trade. Recommend anyone who's seriously considering building a bit of a sales channel over here to take a look at this very good guide. It shows you here where most of the wine is coming through. Looking at the main retail channels, so there's supermarkets, relatively small overall share of the total wine sales by value, but for the category of lower priced entry point wine, that's probably where you would find most of the volume coming through. And this is one of the channels where, as shown here, you can see the yellowtail reserve there, I think, and a couple other varieties of yellowtail, really occupying quite a lot of shelf space. There's some gifting packaging down the bottom as well, which is also an important feature of the market. Wine is a very popular choice for gifting. The specialty liquor stores there, that's where we do see the very, very high priced wines. A bottle of wine there can run up into $300 or $400 Australian dollars without breaking a sweat. Every premium wine label from France can be found in stores like this, plus some of the more obscure and niche premium varieties from the likes of Spain, Italy, and Napa Valley. And then lastly, the image there is of the convenience stores. Taiwan has the highest density of convenience stores anywhere in the world. And this is a growing channel for wine sales, again, for that entry level demographic, particularly sort of young people who are getting into wine drinking for the first time. Chances are they'll be buying from a convenience store. It was a very popular channel during COVID, just because it was quite easy to get into, and it was hard to go to a restaurant during that time. So just as we start to wrap up, I'll leave you with a few of the other peculiarities of the Taiwan wine market, and this segues a little bit into, I'm sure, some of the cultural training you'll hear. A unique feature of Taiwan is just how strong the BYO wine culture is. So it's a very, very common practice to, on your way to dinner, stop off at a specialty wine store and buy 3 or 4 bottles there, and then pay about $30 US for corkage to consume in the restaurant, rather than buy off the wine list. And even with those high corkage rates, it's thought to be a better value approach, because the wine prices on the wine list tend to be at least a couple of times more. The other unique thing for Taiwan is a lot of the drinking culture was forged with whiskey going back in the sort of 70s and 80s, and even to this day, I was surprised to personally experience this for myself, that people drink whiskey at restaurants with meals in the same way that you would open a bottle of wine. And in some ways that kind of frames some of the price points as well. So, spending 100 Australian dollars on whatever you're drinking is about right. So, very, very premium sort of imagery goes with whiskey that translates a little bit into how wine is perceived. The other unique thing here, wine sales are banned in Taiwan. We could do a whole presentation on that one, but in essence, you can't sell online, which means your efforts need to be spent in your traditional channels. As I mentioned, the highest concentration of convenience stores in the world, which does present some opportunities if you have a offering that's relevant for that channel. Interestingly, the import duties of 10% are doubled for sparkling wine. And the last one is, as I sort of alluded to earlier on, there's the whole Freedom Wine movement, which is showing solidarity for Australian winemakers in the face of some of the political challenges being caused in the region. And I won't dive into that one too much. Just to wrap up, so what is the Austrade office here doing? So we operate a website called Best Wine, which serves as a directory of where you can find Australian wines in Taiwan, and provides expert profiles of wines through KOLs and sommeliers and wine writers who talk at length about the qualities of Australian wine and where you can go to find it. And we also have an ongoing business matching program. So going back last month, we run a new to market tasting program, virtual tasting with professional sommeliers and around 100 buyers. And from memory, we had a couple of dozen Australian winemakers there present, and we profiled the wines and arranged introductions following that. So keep an eye out for additional B2B opportunities coming from our team here, led by Jennifer, who's on the call today. She's our wine expert in the Taipei office. And that's a photo of that event, which we did in partnership with Wine Australia. And it was one of many excellent events that we're doing in wine to raise the profile of Australian wines over here in Taipei. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation there, and I now would like to bring on the real expert that we have for you, which is Danny Ho, who is the General Manager of Seven Pyramid Wines, who's been in the wine game for quite a long time. Can I invite Danny to come onto the virtual stage? Good morning,
Hello.
Danny.
Good morning.
So I can see here we have around 21 Australian winemakers on the line who are keen to know more about the Taiwan wine market. Would you mind sharing with us from your experiences, what do you as a wine buyer look for when you're buying or selling wines?
Okay, thank you, Brad. Hello, everyone. For me personally, when I'm looking for Australian wine, I will see the quality of it is. Definitely now times, Australian wine got very good quality, and then we see some price and the quality of packaging. For massive production wise, I will see, because it's for the consumers that seeking traditional Australian wines. So I would suggest keep it fruity, keep it fresh. Does the label easy to recognize what variety it is, or if it's a blend, then it might shows clearly on the back label, so the consumer can easily to match what kind of the wine they are used to drink, what they are seeking for. If it's a unique, boutique, new trend wineries, not using the famous varieties that Australia usually have, then it must have some good quality, of course, and some uniqueness on the label designing. Use a good quality of the paper for the label. Definitely well-fashioned design of the packaging, so the people who drink it is not drinking itself, it's drinking about a style, trend. So it must be uniqueness, but for sure the volume won't be very large compared to the traditional Australian wine. It will be much smaller, but you have to be very uniqueness to us. I also suggest the fair FOB or actual price, because we mentioned about the duty, but actually when we import wine, we see different things. We also think about the price itself, because the tax, how it works in Taiwan is the wine price, then we have to plus alcohol duty, which is $7 per degree per liter. So if it's like 15 degrees of alcohol in a bottle, we usually take us around $75 to $80 to add up in a bottle to pay to the government. Then we add up the shipment fees per bottle, and we multiply with the 10% import duty and 5% multiply 5% of sales tax. Then we have to add up the recycling fees. It's measured by the weight of the bottle. Definitely Taiwanese like a heavy bottle, but for us, we have to pay extra for the recycling, which makes sense. And also we have add up the import paper fees, label checking fee, lab checking fees. And if it's organic, we have another fees to apply again. So, well, on the paper we see it's 10% of duty, but actually we have to add up a lot of stuff on our cost. Also, we have to see about the critic scores. We know James Halliday is very famous in Australia. Also, he gave a lot of scores very high, but we cannot compare it with other regions. We didn't see because it's only in Australia. So when we compare to the other regions' wine, we cannot understand how it's connected. For decanter, for maybe Robert Parker's, we can easily Jim Suckling. We can easily connect to each other because they have a same standard to compare with the how is the aromas, how is the color, how is compared with the other things. But it's not easy for us to compare Australian wines 94, 95, 98 points with the other regions or other magazines. That's the point we are seeking. So we have to check how the wine it is, how wine it is, because I think James Halliday is very generous on the scores. So definitely we have to try that by ourselves to see how it will be accepted by the consumers.
Thanks very much, Danny. So a few good takeaways there. Pay close attention to the critic scores and the awards that your wine wins. Make sure there's fair FOB pricing, and the other takeaway I saw there was to use really good quality paper. Can I just remind everyone, please use the Q&A section in the webinar here if you have any questions for Danny, because we'll be able to give some time to answer any of those, and I can see one has come through already. Just before we get to those, Danny, could you tell me where do you see the challenges for Australian wine in its positioning in the Taiwan market? I think you're on mute there. There we go. Thanks, Danny.
Okay, thank you. All right. I think the challenges are the market is not very big compared to other big population countries. Taiwan is not that big. It's only 23, 24 million people. But luckily, we are a region and the people who love drinking wines. So no matter it's whiskey or wine, we love it. So it's a good thing. But the challenges are there are too many wine regions and too many wine production countries in the world, and they are all seeking to come into this market. So we can see in the old times, we can see only big wine producing regions like Brent showed us in the PowerPoint, like Australia, like New Zealand, USA, Chile, and definitely France. But now there are more and more. Like we didn't see Israel in 20 years ago, but now we see Israel wines, Brazil wines, East European wines in Taiwan. Even though the sales numbers are not that big, but definitely it shares a small cut of the market. And for a lot of countries, they can buy like 5 to 10% in the market. That's huge. And like I said, the tax and the duties is higher, and we cannot sell online. So it stops a little bit about the marketing, because when you do marketing, you want to direct selling online, and it will be easier for you to communicate with the consumers. And now you have to face to different stores, like convenience stores, like the supermarkets or the specialty liquor stores. You have to educate them. You have to tell them the stories. But when you have like 100, 200 wines on the shelf, you cannot remember everything. You cannot remember the vintage, good or bad. You cannot remember what's the story behind the wine, or especially each wine. Mostly you can remember is the winery's story, where it is. That's it. So we need to educate a lot. We have to invest a lot on the educating on those owners or the people who are selling it. Also, we have to. Oh, there's the big point is the screw caps. Taiwanese consumers doesn't like screw caps. Well, it's getting better compared to 30 years ago when we tried to import the Australian wines. Everything is screw cap, and people hate screw cap at the time. They think because it's a kind of Chinese thing, because it's a rice wine in Taiwan. Always use screw cap, so it shows the symbol of cheap wines. But now we are getting more education to them. We let them realize the advantages of the screw caps. So the younger generation are more accepting the screw caps, but for us, we realize that older generations, the corporate owners, especially for fine wine, they are still not accepting the screw caps. Wine competition is very strong. We doesn't have a very clear boundary for wine importers, distribution channels, and the retails. Like the US, they have 3-tier licensing regulations. Taiwan doesn't have that. So a lot of like importers or a lot of the distribution channel owners, retail owners, they can apply for the license. So for one thing is good is, well, then you have a lot of importers, then you can reach to convince them to sell your wine in Taiwan. But the bad thing will be the volume. And you didn't know who are good importers or not. You can only reach them and you know they will import some wine for you, but you don't know what's the background, what's the history, how they can sell or tell the story to the consumers.
Thanks very much, Danny. We've got a couple of questions coming in, and I think we've got a couple of minutes for some brief responses. Could you tell me about the difference between the holiday scoring and what is common practice for scoring in Taiwan?
Well, people usually see Robert Parker's in the old times. When he retired, people are trying to seek other professionals that can trust with. So, well, we can still say wine advocate is still very strong in Taiwan. Decanter as well, and James Suckling. I think those three are most common. Well, generally speaking, not in a specific region, because we see Italian wine have a different kind of critics. But generally speaking, those three are the biggest at the moment. Definitely people will see wine enthusiast. For James Holiday, it's like I said, it's more generous. Usually when we see James Suckling 95 points is we see it's much equal to wine advocate James Robert Parker's 90. But when we see James Halliday, we are harder to compare with. How much point is how much, like 98%, 98 points, 99 points. We don't compare it to 99 to James Suckling or 99 to Rob Parker.
Great. And lastly, direct sales. Is that a big part of your business? And do you see that as an important feature of the market?
Yes, I think. Even though it's not able to sell wine online, I do see the local specialty liquor stores revenue are decreasing. But the supermarkets are increasing. So I think there's a small difference between those in the past 10, 20 years. So we are trying to enhance the direct selling because we try to speak to the consumer directly and try to tell them the story behind the wine. It is much easier through ourselves than the selling people in the liquor store or in the supermarket, because we know the stories behind the winery, the winemaker, and how they make the wine. Definitely it's easier, but it takes more time for us. It takes more efforts. We have to speak 1-to-1 or speak 1-to-10 at a time. It's much harder. So we will try to get our best to let them know the philosophy of the winemaking.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for your time and your insight, Danny. I'm sure that was of tremendous benefit to the winemakers on the call. So with that, we've reached the time limit now, and I'd like to hand back over to Sarah for the rest of the webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Danny. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Brent, and thanks, Danny. Thanks so much for your insights there. There's a few extra questions that we've seen come through on the right-hand side as well, so we'll take those and get answers to you after this directly as well. So next, now we've got a bit of a handle on the wine landscape in Taiwan, I'd like to hand over to Fran Baxter, who is the Executive Director at Value Learning. Fran and her team are going to give us a bit more of an insight into the cultural aspects that it's important to understand before doing business in Taiwan. Fran, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm very briefly like to also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I come to you today, which is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and recognise the traditional custodians of the lands across the country where you're living, learning and working. And so just very briefly, a little bit about us. I come to you from Value Learning. We're an intercultural consultancy, and along with my partner and co-founder, Marcela Lapatosa, we work in the area of maximising the experience for individuals and teams and organisations who are working across different cultures. And we have done quite a lot of work also with DFAT and also the Global Victoria, working with their trade commissioners. So our aim in joining you today is to really try and help you understand more about the cultural influences that can impact on business. And I'd also like to introduce you to Amy Liu, who has over 20 years working also in the cross-cultural coaching space, and Marcela Lapatosa, who's a cross-cultural psychologist. So together we bring both the kind of core elements of working interculturally, but also Amy will bring the local knowledge, as she is located in Taiwan, and brings that wealth of on the ground experience that I'm sure will help you as you move forward with your business dealings with Taiwan. So we're going to just look at these three key areas, introduce a little bit about global competence and how you can enhance your skills to improve the intercultural communication relationships. identify key ways to navigate across cultural differences, and then look at some very specific things that relate to Taiwan and that can be different maybe to other cultural experiences that you've had in different locations. So we're going to do that over the next, more or less 45 minutes, and there'll be opportunities to answer questions. So please feel free to post in the chat or in the Q&A. But we'll start with a question and welcome your responses in the chat area, which you'll find on the right of your screen. Go up to the top, you'll see chat. And what are you most curious about when it comes to Taiwan? Just feel free to answer. Anyone that has any specific areas they're interested in, and we'll absolutely do our best to address it. But I am going to hand over to Amy, who's going to start with a few interesting facts and like to acknowledge the great work that Brent did in introducing us to Taiwan, and certainly we'll do our best not to overlap on the information, but also to reinforce what can I do in order to be able to work in this market. So Amy, I'll hand over to you.
Great. Thank you, Fran. Good afternoon, everyone in Australia. My name is Amy Liu. I'm based here in Taipei, Taiwan, and I'm excited to be able to have 45 minutes to share with you about Taiwan culture and how it's best to do business here in Taiwan. And I would encourage you to type your question in the chat box as well, as we don't have that much time, and I want to make sure that I cover something that's specific for you. Nonetheless, I'd like to kick off by sharing some of the highlights about Taiwan, so to give you an idea of an overview of Taiwan and what you might want to expect when you're working here in Taiwan. So I hope some of you have traveled to Taiwan. Oftentimes Taiwan is shared as a hidden gem here in Asia. Often people hear about Thailand, about Vietnam, and different places for the beach paradise and things like that. But, what do you know much about Taiwan? So feel free to really put in the questions in the chat box for me. So nonetheless, we have lots of expats living out here in Taiwan. And indeed, last year in 2021, Taiwan was ranked as #1 as the best expatriate location in the world. And having that said, one of them has to be concluded to how friendly people are here in Taiwan. 9 out of 10 people who have moved to Taiwan really say Taiwanese are really friendly, and strangers, are out there to help you out as well too. So that links to we're quite a happy bunch. We ranked 35th as happiest country out of the 156 countries in the world. And Taiwan is small, yet regionally we have Taipei on the west coast with Taipei, and then Taichung, and then Kaohsiung. So the city in the central area of Taiwan, Taichung, is really known to be really happy people and very friendly people. And having that said, Taiwan is also very progressive in many different ways. And so one of the things is that we're the first country to announce that we could have legalized gay marriages here in Taiwan. So that really shows our mind is quite open and willing to try and accept different new ideas here in Taiwan. Economy-wise, and Brent has shared a lot about wine-specific information about the economy here in Taiwan. Certainly, Taiwan is one of the 4 Asian tigers in the region, and we do rank number 18th as largest economy here in Taiwan. And, we're quite small, half the size of Tasmania, and Brent has also mentioned that. At the same time, we do quite well here in Taiwan. And what do really people know about Taiwan? You probably also know that high tech is the highlight of Taiwan, and really coming out here, I know you're selling wines. At the same time, the topics of conversations may come up about the industries here in Taiwan. So it's quite important to understand our #1 company here in Taiwan is called TSMC. It's Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company here in Taiwan. And it's on news everywhere, and it's talked about everywhere. The stock price every day is being talked about and discussed on news. And so it's not just about their stock prices. It's also because how powerful they are, that they produce produce 20%, 24% of the world semiconductor outputs. And at the same time, they really provide a lot of the high quality and high end chips that are in the national defense in many countries as well too. So TSMC is definitely the highlight of Taiwan. And at the same time, TSMC actually started on the West Coast, again, a little bit south of Taipei, in Hsinchu. And Hsinchu right now is actually ranked as one of the richest cities in Taiwan. And so Brent also mentioned that the consumption of wine is not really just in Taipei. And so targeting cities where the semiconductor industries, or what we call the science parks, are at, may be a great way, because, you know, they do have high incomes out there, and then they have lots of banquets and parties that they are putting together as well too. And so the cities with the science parks are Hsinchu, and a little bit central part that's in Taichung, and then further down south is in Tainan. I don't know how the map shows up for people to see, but you can kind of see where, you know, all the little writings and labels. These are all the places where we have our science parks out there. And then at the same time, the talent of the pools out there, the people who went to top universities, are all really working at these, what we call the semiconductor science park industries. And so that might be also a reference to the cities where wine might be consumed quite a bit more than other locations. So apart from our high-tech industry, let's also look at some of the highlights for events that people get involved as well too. And these are places where perhaps celebrations can also happen as well too. So let's look at the one on the list here is also talk about our health coverage in Taiwan. Taiwan has a very well-known national health insurance here in Taiwan. And that's for both Chinese and Western medication. And so people are really quite happy to be talking about the things that they're proud of. I'm sorry, I jumped to the slide, just jumped to the different slide. So nonetheless, Taiwan, a lot of people may not know this about Taiwan, you know, with all the high mountains that we have and the tea plantations, and cycling is also very popular here. So, so that's a big event here where the event called COM, C-O-M, is where you go from zero sea level all the way to 3,275 kilometers above the sea level. And you do that in all one day. And so a lot of people from Europe, from around the world, really come out here for that particular competition. And Taiwan is also the only place now that kept traditional writing. And that's something I feel Taiwanese are quite proud of as well too, that when I say Taiwanese, and again, the ethnic, what we call ethnic Chinese groups is really from China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Singapore. Taiwan is really the only place that kept the writing and the history, and it's probably the most what we call Confucius-based culture out of the 4 locations that I've mentioned. And having that said, that means education is really important. And so education, how are you providing knowledge and information for the people is also important when you're engaging with your clients out here in Taiwan. So let me move forward to the next slide. My slide seems to be a little bit off, but I guess it's the right next page. So I often get asked this question. I wonder if this is also your question. You know, when you come out to Taiwan, what do you need to be more mindful about? You know, what is sensitive here in Taiwan? What can you say and what can you not say? You know, is it Chinese people here, or is it Taiwanese, or do you often see maybe at Olympics it's called Chinese Taipei, or, you know, is it really one country, 2 countries, or one country, 2 systems? And is it a province? Is it a country? Is it called Formosa? And again, I'm not here to give you a history lesson. I just want to give you something really quickly, and perhaps I can give you a bit of perspective when you come out here to Taiwan and how you might want to be dealing with the people out here as well too. So I will give you 2 analogies and two metaphors. And so number 1 is about the people here. The people here would really prefer to be called by Taiwanese. And so you wanted to say, hey, Amy, what do people like to do here in Taiwan? What do the Taiwanese people like to do here? But if you say, what do the Chinese like to do here in Taiwan? Then that's a little bit different. That would be them people who are based in mainland China. So one story behind this is just really looking at Australia too, right? So from Australia, we can kind of, you know, go back to the roots where your roots came from the UK, and then now you've been in Australia for a long time. And so if people come and ask you, you're definitely going to say, hey, I'm Australian. You're not going to say, oh, I'm 3rd generation British, or I'm fifth generation Welsh. So you're really proud to talk about the land that you're connecting to, which is you're Australian. And so that is Taiwan. So Taiwanese are very proud that we're connected to the land that is called Formosa, which means a beautiful island. So the people is Taiwanese. So you say Taiwanese people over here. Nonetheless, other things I used to talk about: the Chinese New Year, the Lunar New Year, the Chinese language. I like to learn some Chinese language. What kind of Chinese food is really good to eat? So that's a general category of things and items. So then in that case, it's all right to use the word Chinese. And the language we speak is really Chinese, but to be precise, it's called Mandarin. But people are definitely not going to be offended if you say Chinese food, or as what I've mentioned, Chinese language. So that's part one, to answer this big questions that you would like to know about. And part two, I guess it's a little bit political background, right? It's really Taiwan. How do you refer Taiwan to? And I'm not sure how much you learn about the business in China versus in Taiwan. What is okay to do in China? What's not okay to do in Taiwan? And often this is a question people ask that, I get a little confused that China is called PRC and Taiwan is called ROC, and it still ends with Republic of China. And China is People Republic of China. So that means both of you are China, aren't you? Again, this is, with a long history. And for you to come to Taiwan, just to know that Taiwan has its own government system, its own currency, and its own passport. And it's different than the people who hold a different sets of things, out there in PRC. So the quick story here, maybe to also help understanding this, is that, let's just, again, I know you're from Australia, but I'm using American as a point of reference that, the big America, the big land of America. Again, coming back, Taiwan, the history by itself is about 400 years, right? The Portuguese actually found Taiwan in the 1500s and gave the name Formosa to Taiwan. So then Taiwan, a lot of times if you see Formosa name, and most likely that is actually somebody from Taiwan who opened a wine shop maybe, or a beef noodle shop, or something that they call Formosa beef noodle shop out in other countries. And that just really helps people to understand that how we tie to the name Formosa to this piece of land here in Taiwan. And we do also have indigenous here as well. We have 16 different tribes that are recognized by the government up to date now. And so the interesting thing is the indigenous now are linked to the indigenous in Australia, in New Zealand, and all the way to Easter Island. And they originated from Taiwan, and that's been confirmed in the recent 20 years or so. So then that is the history of Taiwan, a bit of, the indigenous there. And then we started having the Chinese from China, particularly from one province, and that's called Fujian, coming out to Taiwan. And so people have settled down here particularly from 1624 all the way to 1895. So it's over 280 years or so of the actual people moving over here for better lives. And so these people that, from 1895 and then continue on, with another 100 years and living out here in Taiwan. So the political part of this, for perhaps a quick understanding, is that then, as an example, is let's say in America, right? So America now is taken over by the communists. And so Biden took the United States of America, so that's the official name, United States of America, and then landed on Hawaii, a much smaller place. And Hawaii is, consists of the local people and other people who are living out there. And then Biden then landed on Hawaii and said, this is called the United States of America now. At the same time, United States of America still continues to excel with prosperity, as well as freedom of speech and whatever you can do on the land of Hawaii. And so, but then now the mainland in America is communist, and so that you cannot go there anymore. So that is quite similar to what had happened to Taiwan in 1949. So the actual name in China was actually called Republic of China. And that, really consists of success, prosperity, and freedom, and doing things well. And so in 1949, the Republic of China then landed on Taiwan, and then, stay here on Taiwan and continue to have that freedom of speech and things that you would like to do here in Taiwan. And so that's a separation then of China, which is then named People's Republic of China, PRC. And then the ROC, which continues to anyone who wants to learn Chinese or the language, or people who want to know more about the culture, it's free to come over to the land of Taiwan. And so hopefully that was a little insight in terms of, what is PRC and what's ROC. And ROC continues to thrive and with success, and people are quite proud of a few things, here in Taiwan, for the freedom and the success that we have on the land of Taiwan. So that is the quick big questions that often that people ask about Taiwan and China. All right, so I'm going to turn that over to Marcella, who's going to share a bit about culture. Marcella, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. And it's fantastic how quick you did, like an amazing overview and highlights of what Taiwanese are proud of. Some topics you can talk about just to break the ice at the beginning, and really understanding the differences between, China and Taiwan and how to talk about it. That's so good. And we're going to go back to Amy in a second because we want to talk a bit more about, the Taiwanese culture. But just before we go back to Amy, we want to talk about what is culture and why is it important if you're going to sell your wine, right? We know that, and you all know if you sell wine all over the world, that every culture is different, and the way people see the world influences the way they behave and also the way they consume their wine. So culture is the learn and share pattern of beliefs, behaviors, and values of a group of people that are passed down generation to generation. So it's pretty much the way people see the world. What's value in a certain group of people and what's not value, and that influences the way people behave. And we like to think of culture as an iceberg where you can only see 10%. So you might see people drinking wine in certain places or buying certain wine. Brent was very clear about the type of wine that people buy in Taiwan, and that's just behaviors, things that we can see. But what's interesting is the 90% that we can't see underneath the water of an iceberg, which is, those values. So the way power is distributed, the way people make decisions, the way people deal with conflict, the way they communicate, how do they manage time. So all these values that are harder to see influence the way people behave. And, wine consumption is just one type of behavior that culture is influencing. That's why it looks different in every culture. So what we want to think is, it's important when you go to another culture to also understand what your culture is. So what business culture are you going with when you go to Taiwan or to any other culture? And then if we think about the Australian iceberg, the way people tend to do business in Australia and the way it's accepted to do business is quite egalitarian, it's quite rule compliant, it's very direct communication, it's the way we deal with conflict is quite direct and discussing and very linear, and it's also very casual. Australians are known for being very egalitarian and very casual in their dealings and very transparent as well. So it's important to understand that when we Australians go to another place to do business, we are going to see things not the way they are, but the way we are. And that's to become more intercultural competent and more effective in selling our products or engaging in business. It's important that we know how we face business, but also, what does the iceberg of the other culture look like? And that's why we want to go back to Amy now and look at what does the Taiwanese iceberg look like? What are those values that are driving business and the way people consume and interact and do things and see the world in Taiwan? So I'm going to hand it over to Amy now to have a deeper dive into those Taiwanese values.
Great. Thank you, Marcella. And I myself really love this iceberg analogy. It's really giving picture and it shows, very clearly that when you come to Taiwan, you may know about the way people consume wine, the way they talk, they dress, and the music they like, the sports they play. And that's really 10%. And what is really underneath that 90% is when you start engaging and doing business with the people, right? That's something that you don't see, and that's the 90%. So the 90% is very important to understand. And at one point over here, by showing images, that's another great style for working with the Taiwanese. Just look again, our language. When we learn the language, it's I don't know what Chinese characters look to you, but they're very pictorial, aren't they? Right? So the people are taught here to see things in pictures. And that's a great concept for you, that how are you bringing your company or you as a picture for people to see, right? The more information, visual is very important. So in the presentation, what kind of visuals are you giving people? What can you share so people can see it right away? That is very important. And so, labeling, that's why when you look at the bottle of wine, so there's a design of bottle really pretty. you know, what stands out for people to see right away. It really gives an impact of how we interact with people. And so the iceberg analogy then brings to, you know, what is really down underneath that part that we don't see, which is called the core cultural value that influence our Taiwanese behaviors. And these are some of the items. And so it's about hierarchy. You know, do you know how to maintain harmony? The family is actually in the business. The success of Taiwanese business is actually 85% still on what we call the SMEs, the small, medium-sized entrepreneurships, right? And so, so people tend to do business, you know, from small sizes, from 4 to 5 people to, you know, up to 100 people. And that's Taiwan, right? So if you look at Taiwan and ask you, what is one big brand here in Taiwan, other than TSMC now, right? People can hardly say a conglomerate or a big name here in Taiwan. But if I asked you a big company in Japan or Korea, you can definitely name them. So in Korea, could be LG, could be Samsung. In Taiwan, in Japan, could be Sony, could be Toyota, could be Mitsubishi, right? All these different large companies. And so Taiwan is really on that small businesses, SMEs, and at the same time, you know, it's a family created business, and even for multinationals, really a family system in the organization. So having said that, then building relationship and connecting to people is very important to be successful here in Taiwan. And then of course, hierarchy links to phase, and then the culture here is probably the most Confucius-based culture compared to other 4 what I call the ethnic Chinese groups in China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Singapore. And so education is actually important in this region. And if you want to include Japan and Korea as well too, right? So that is all influenced by Confucianism, and that means really education. So I recall Danny actually mentioned that giving them education, right? It's providing information and knowledge, and that's a way to really get to people get educated so they know about the wines from different regions and different countries. So how do you talk about and giving resources and be open to provide resources? You know, I've been working as an intercultural trainer here in Taiwan, and also I worked in 5 different locations in this region here. Often people come out here and say, you know, what's the best way for me to really tap into and work with people here? And I say, are you willing to share your knowledge and let people know about who you are and what you know? That is really the key for sharing your information and sharing your knowledge. And that comes from something that you don't see that's underneath the iceberg, is the importance of education. So let's, you know, we don't have time to cover every single cultural value here, but I feel what's most important for you to understand is to really understand hierarchy, and hierarchy really impact the face. And what does hierarchy mean? And you when you read the word, you all have a sense of what that really means. And it's really right away when people meet each other, it doesn't matter if in social setting or professional setting. I wanted to know, how am I in relation to you? So who are you? How do I know you, or do I not know you? And at the same time, I'm looking at, are you equal to me? Are you above me, or are you below me? And it's not about to put people down or up. It's just really to be, how am I be proper? So the goal for people is I want to be appropriate in this context so I don't offend anybody. And so that's why we're trying to assess, how am I in relation to you? And same thing, how is this bottled wine in relation to other wines that I know? So having that ranking is also very important. And so Taiwanese really look at that pecking order and where do I fit in this pecking order? And to find out where do I fit in this pecking order is really coming from these 4 pieces of puzzle here that they wanted to know right away. So title, how do we get to know your title? So people here in Asia tend to exchange business cards at the beginning of any engagement, right? So it's not in the middle, it's not at the end. So there's a purpose to that, right? So that's why it's hidden. It's underneath the iceberg that, you know, you may see it done, but, you know, we're providing the information about why it's done. So then once I get your business card from the beginning, then I kind of know your title. So that's just one criteria out of the 4 that I'm looking at. So now, you know, if I look at you and you're a managing director, so then I place you at a certain place. And then, you know, what's your seniority? How long have you been in the wine industry? And then people look at the age, right? So they look around, and so they may have an estimation of what your age is. But if you're willing to share, you don't have to share directly, oh, I'm 35 years old, I'm 50 years old, I'm 60 years old. But you could say, you know, 20 years back, that's when I got my university degree. And so people roughly know, you know, where you're at. And one of the cute things that people do here is they may ask you, you know, do you know your Chinese animal zodiac? right? So this is the year of ox now. So if you're an ox, that, it's all 12 years apart, right? So either you're 36, 48 or 60. And so, it's probably quite easy to tell if you're 48 or you're 60, right? And so that's another way people kind of roughly want to know your age. And so education background as well. It's not just about your degree, did you have a PhD or a master's, but it's about your certification. So what kind of background do you have, and what kind of license do you have? So then these are the 4, what we call the basic information that they're learning about you. And remember, I talk about visuals, very important. So in their head, in most Taiwanese people's head, it's about putting this puzzle together, right? So there's another 15 pieces of puzzles, and I don't know much about you. The more that you're able to provide more, the more it's easier for me to see, right? So if I have 4 pieces, just as if you're playing a 50-piece puzzle game. So I have 4 pieces, so maybe I put them at the corners, but I don't see much about who you are. So that's a bit, distant and cold, that I don't know much about you. So if you can share more, that I'm putting more pieces together. So if I have 10 or 15 pieces out of 50, out of this, picture that I want to see, then I may say, oh, it's exciting. It's almost there. It's Winnie the Pooh, so then they can start collecting and know that this is who you are. This is about your company. And then this is what, I can be in relation to you in order to start the business with you. So I put family on the left, and this is also an important piece that people want to get to know a bit about your family. So they tend to want to know about you married, to have any children, and details like that. And I don't know how comfortable you are to share those information. My advice is that if you're willing to share, that means you're giving them more pieces of puzzles here. And it could be information where you've traveled to, because I've never been to Taiwan, but I've been to Japan, I've been to Korea. And so that gives people a view that you have worked in Asia region before, so that you're putting on another piece of puzzle. So work on your puzzle and see what kind of information, in addition to this 4 or 5 information, that you're willing to give people, and so that you can really people can know about the details. So then that's about hierarchy. And then so after that, then when I know how am I in relation to you, that means I'm giving you face and respecting that pecking order. So giving face is really about not making somebody embarrassed. And so to maybe to respect that hierarchy and not to make somebody look bad in any situation in the group. So you can only lose face when you're in a group. So face really links to that hierarchy. And then I said that now I know the pecking order. What's important? What's the next important thing that people look at? Relationship. And then in Mandarin, it's called guanxi. So guanxi is really about how do I open my gate of my connections of who I am to really start working with you. So I call relationship as a magic key. And then precisely all these celebrations where they have wine, it's really a way for people to really connect when they do business. And so relationship, I feel, in all your culture, and it doesn't matter where you come from, it's very similar that you have happy hours, you network, you want to, make friends and you want to connect. And the difference here is that Taiwanese really depend on one another of their connections, and also really looking at what is my obligation to these people that I know. So then, how do I reciprocate this relationship? So to reciprocate oftentimes is how do you then know about gift giving? So let's take a look at, what are some of the ways that you can build guanxi? And as I said, this is a magic key to really do business. When people don't have the relationship with you, they may tend to seem a bit polite, a bit more formal, and then not really answering your questions. So the challenging thing for you is to how do you break that wall between you and the partner that you wanted to be dealing with, and really coming into what I call that their inner circle relationship. So it's not so difficult. It's about spending time. Are you willing to spend time with them? Is it about 10-minute coffee break? Is it going out to lunch? Is it about spending, time on the weekend to go hiking with them? And then the second part then is how do you share about yourself? The more information that goes back to that puzzle again, the more information about you that you share, the bigger this puzzle that they can collect, and then they know how to engage with you. And I've also mentioned sharing your background, your information, your knowledge is also very helpful for people to connect with you. And so then they would trust you, and therefore they want to ask me maybe even more about your background. Gift giving, it's actually relatively easy. You don't have to think about, what do I need to buy for the Taiwanese? It's much about food sharing. And so you'll see if you come to Taiwan, all the department stores in the basement, they are what we call the cookie shops and desserts and all that you can share with people. So bring, food to share. And if you come from Australia, bring something that I think is very cultural from your country or something that relates to your family. You can bring something and say, this is, my son's favorite types of cookies. And I'm here, bring a box of this to share with people. And so that connects you to your family and also the food, right, that you're sharing with the people here. And oftentimes people are looking for a connection. So if you're able to tell somebody another connection and introducing them, that's also a best way to build relationship. And so again, how do you really turn the business to do better business and really to have this magic key and turn that magic key to work with the people that you will be connecting with here in Taiwan? And so then how does it really happen? We are at a networking event. So if you come together at a wine event, perhaps, and most people, what's in their head is, again, that number one thing that they're looking at, what's my pecking order? And then, do I know you as a business? Were your company recommended by another reputable business or not? How do I connect to you? How do I network with this particular person? And then, so once I know these two information, and then it's at the time, the social time that you're willing to spend with these people. So, a lot of times people go out for dinner, and after dinner, maybe drinking. And then maybe you probably know in Asia, it's a lot of a karaoke time where I go out and sing. And I don't know about you, I don't sing well. At the same time, you just also have to know one song that you would like to sing if you get asked to go out to these singing events. And then, so after that, then is really they're looking at how much time. So the professional work and versus, after work hours can kind of come into a gray area. So they're also looking at, are you willing to take that little extra time with them or not? And so now once you're really engaging with them in this event, and so we already talked about some of the things that it's really good to talk about in the conversation. Oftentimes it's about your interests, right? About your wine, or, do you have your hobbies, hiking and traveling to different countries, and the knowledge you know about wine or knowledge you know in certain other area. Perhaps it could be sports. And then if you have any other personal information that you're willing to share. And just to keep in mind, Taiwanese really respect hierarchy. And so any communication functions that you go to tend to be a bit more formal initially. Dress code, even though there isn't an official dress code as a new vendor coming into Taiwan, it's great to see how you present yourself. Again, remember that's image, how we see something, and that gives us an idea of who you are. And initially, maybe people can be a bit formal that they go by the last name and then be their title. So it can be Chairman Wang, management. So Chairman Wang or Director Lee. And then they may just tell you, it's okay, just call me Amy. So once they said that, then you can be a bit more informal. And be observant of the seating arrangement. If you get invited to go out, let people tell you where to sit down and don't just jump into a seat and say, I'd like to sit down here. So that's generally what happens when you start networking with people. So we talked about hierarchy is very important. And second part is the magic key is 关系. And I like to say the third part is this concept in Taiwan that's called 人情味. You may not hear this much. A lot of people talk about 关系, but this is really special here in Taiwan. 人情味 really means as foreigners come to Taiwan and say Taiwanese are friendly. But what's really behind that friendliness is that we're still very thoughtful for others. Right, so if you see a car accident, you see somebody who really need help, Taiwanese still go out and help. Whereas, my friends from Hong Kong and Singapore and say, hey, we were all taught about the 人情味 in our culture, yet we don't do that anymore. So it's so refreshing to see that Taiwanese are still keeping that 人情味. And that's why that deferred to, right? So the people here are so beautiful because you're still very kind and help out. So then this is also another thing. How are you finding opportunity to offer, to support, to get more information, to get more knowledge, to be thoughtful for that person because you brought a box of cookies from Australia to share with the people. These are also seen to be a way of building trust as well.
Amy, we've just had a question pop up in our chat, which I think might be a good time to address it, because I'm realizing there's so much information here that's of value, but we are kind of running a little short on time. So one of the questions, and I often hear it as well, is when speaking with Taiwanese people, and is there a sense that there's an indirectness in the communication, and that, you know, if they tell you yes, is that likely to mean yes? Our questioner has said, or is it like they might experience in Japan, when yes may mean yes, but it also may not, it may mean no? And maybe you've just got a quick response on that.
Sure. Okay. That's a great question. The yes and no really depends on your relationship. That's why I say relationship is really the key to understanding how to do business with people. So once you build that relationship, you're really in the inner circle with the people. When you're in the inner circle, then that means I can open up. So you're kind of like the family. So when I say yes in that inner circle, that means I really do be out there to do something for you. But initially, if you have just met them, that means you're an outsider. So as outsiders, sometimes indeed, when they say yes, it's just yes to not to lose face, right? Not to look bad in a certain situation. So often, yes, initially, yes may often just mean that, yes, I heard you. Yes, I hear your plan. I hear your proposal, and this is what you want to do. So then you may want to check a few times to really see if that is a yes. And you will know it if you're in that inner circle, right? So a lot of people do training for people, and particularly for a long-term expat, where I do follow-up coaching sessions with them. They say that when Amy, when you talk in the session, often that feels so theoretical. And then so after 2-3 months, I get it now. That wall really came down. I'm really part of that inner circle. So that question really depends on your relationship, your inner circle, outer circle or not. And hopefully that gives you a perspective. I know that you all have meetings that you have to go to. And so I just want to go through quickly on this. I may not go through every single point over here. So business, you know, people really start with business card once you can really start traveling to Taiwan. They may shake hands with you. And just again, shaking hands doesn't really mean that, you know, with the Western standards, so Taiwanese may tend to have a softer handshake. So don't feel that they're insincere to do business with you if they have a softer handshake. Again, if you have third party, somebody who knows you really well, have this person introduce you into a meeting. That would be very helpful. And again, you know, address people who are senior in the meeting first, and then try to also include everybody. And I know I'm not reading the very last part, so same thing as Brent was saying, that I don't read the very last part because it's got covered by but what we presenters see. So I'm just going to skip whatever that's on the very last part there. And then what you wanted to do is that when you're in a meeting, you want to be very open. You want to also be patient because, you know, a lot of time Taiwanese come to the meetings to really listen to what you want to say, and they're not really there to make a decision. So if it's the first few meetings, if it, you know, again, when people say yes, it really just means, okay, I hear what you're trying to say. And so don't jump ahead, just so you really have a little more patience and make sure the harmony is maintained there. That means you don't show anger. Don't show off that you're arrogant, that you know everything about wine, and you're here really to teach the people here, right? So you're here to share information, how you can be very humble and not to point out mistakes that people do. Once you're, again, in that inner circle relationship, people are very open to hear what you want to say. So just wait a little bit rather than jumping in too quickly in a meeting. And then, so, you know, when meeting really generally happens, try to stay with the agenda because people really want to follow exactly what you say. And then they also want to know, because you're somebody who may be more experienced, that you may be at the higher top of the pecking order, and therefore they want to hear from you first rather than participating. So often it may feel that they're not participating and they're not asking questions. Just give them a little bit more time. So write down things and paper trailing things as much as you can, and then just provide that clarity so people can be aware of what you're trying to tell them. Oftentimes you may have people, there's 5 people that came to the meeting, and only one person is talking, right? And so don't make the other 4 talk because they know exactly what their role is in the meeting. So that one person is a speaker, the other 4 are there just to listen and to talk, right? So let them speak rather than you pointing at people and have them share. So that's something to really pay attention to. Again, seniority is very important. People tend to be on time to the meetings, but the senior person may sometimes arrive a little bit late just to show their status a bit. But generally, I would say meeting run really on time here in Taiwan. So nonetheless, Taiwanese are again a very friendly bunch over here, and we were also ranked as #1 being most friendly people. And we're also very proud. Taiwan is so safe that people can go out late at night, and women feel very safe around the country. So even drinking late at night, taking the taxi home, we can call taxi, Ubers, and different options here in Taiwan. So people generally feel really safe to go home if they have some wine. And then lastly, the food is also so wonderful here that, praise about the food or talk about what you like about the food here. People will tap into that right away with you and build that stronger relationship. And then lastly, as I mentioned, there is democracy here. People are very proud that we can directly vote for our president here in Taiwan. So to summarize, how do you be successful when you're here in Taiwan is that Taiwanese still actually give foreigners or, non-Taiwanese what we call the foreigner privilege. They're really interested about you, not only about you as an individual, your family background, your education background, and also your wine knowledge and what else, what other knowledge you have. So share it with them. And that would allow them to feel that, you want to connect with them. And that may also inspire the Taiwanese. Wow, this is what you do out there. And then I think for any countries you go to, you can say something that you really like about Taiwan experience apart from food, right? So what do you enjoy here? And then really telling them some of the things of, why you do certain things. And as I mentioned again, education is so important that your experience and your knowledge is also valued here by the people. Marcella, I guess Brent and Danny have talked a lot about how wine is consumed. And so we're going to skip this and open the last, I guess we have, 3 minutes or so to answer other questions that may be shared in the chat box. Did you see any other questions that were in the chat box?
No, I haven't seen any questions yet. But what I'll do while people think of the questions, we have a little video from a couple of wine that can be very useful. So make sure you pop your questions in the chat, and I'll just share this video. Let me see. Here we go.
I think the thing with Taiwan is that wherever you are, of course, Taiwan feels like Taiwan. It feels Taiwanese.
Be prepared to be flexible. The environment may be different. The people may be different. So be open to all that. So you let all of that in.
Be led by the people who have invited you and see how they sort of behave. There's nothing very complex where you're going to make some awful kind of faux pas where they'll never speak to you again or anything like that. I don't think there's anything really obvious like that.
And be really active. Don't try and hide away. Put your hand up for pretty much everything that they're doing.
The Taiwanese make it so easy for you to be
concise. And be really clear about your message and ask for acceptance and ask for feedback.
So if you are angry or you disagree with somebody, if you're feeling something, that if you start raising your voice, that's not going to get you anywhere. The only thing people will think is that there's probably either something wrong with you or you're just a rude foreigner. So don't do it.
Understand the makeup of their business. People are really important in their business as well. So how they're going to resource it. You want to make sure that there's an ability to be able to carry out the plan. Don't get caught up in certain trends or buzzwords. Just be really true to yourself.
As a place to be, Taiwan feels an incredibly lovely place to be because it's relaxed, it's safe, it's clean, but it's not boring. It's friendly, it's helpful, it's intuitive. It feels like you're living within something which feels like, oh yeah, well, I want to do that. Oh, I can do that by doing that. So it really isn't that challenging. I've got to be honest, it's not.
We're there for them. We're not there for us, and that way we're really acting as a team.
In these kind of cultures, what you're looking at is something where it's more about the whole and about doing the right thing by society.
They are people that are really loyal. So it's a market that, you can go in, I feel, and that you can trust.
And you have to recognize that. You have to recognize that it's not just about what you want.
Okay, and that was really good insights. They make it sound very easy, I have to say. But I think with all the insights we got from Brendan, from Amy, I think people are very well prepared to face Taiwan, right?
Yeah, and I want to add on to, people are really indeed very friendly and open. So Taiwanese are very flexible to try. I think that's one of the good part is that people are willing to try different wine, different work, and different anything kind of different, right? And so again, the key is how you build that relationship for them to feel they connect with you. Then they're willing to listen to something that's new and interesting.
And we'll be very happy to share our presentation and the recording after this. It'll come out from the team at Wine Australia. But in the meantime, if you have any additional questions, I'm sure they can be directed through Wine Australia and we'll be able to answer directly. And obviously, a number of the questions that will be directed also to the Austrade team. But if you have anything regarding doing business or interacting, please let us know. But thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. And thank you, Amy, for those really personal and well kind of explained insights into the culture. It's been very helpful for us too.
Thank you, Fran. It's been my pleasure to be here as well too.
Thank you again, Amy. I echo everything Fran has just said, and Fran and Marcella, thank you both as well for all of your help and insights today too. As Fran just mentioned, we will send through the recording and slides and any other information. There's a couple of unanswered questions from earlier that we'll also get answers through to you as well after the session. So thank you again to all the presenters, and thank you to all of you for joining the session today. Hopefully you've got all the tools you need now to succeed in doing business in Taiwan, and looking forward to seeing you all again when we next have a cultural training and market briefing. Thanks very much, everyone.